Thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here. I missed 2 planes on the way, but I still made it. I am going to talk to you about the current transformation in our societies, which is comparable to the second industrial revolution. The first and second industrial revolutions in earlier times. We've gone through this transformation already for 20-25 years, particularly in the economy and technologies, but we're now reaching a stage where the rest of the society, its institutions, the public sector, and our everyday life have to adjust to these major changes. And it's a big transformation. If we look at the earlier industrial revolutions, they had similar situations. After the first industrial revolution in the 1840s, there was a major economic crisis due to the adjustment difficulties in contemporary societies. And similarly, in the 1930s, when societies were trying to adjust to the second industrial revolution, there was a major economic crisis that then spilled over to the rest of the society, and we experienced revolutions and wars as a result. So we are in a major, living through a major change at the moment, and it's really important for us to try to understand how we could get to a more sustainable path, both in our everyday life and in terms of the larger society. The starting point is not very good. We have an unsustainable socioeconomic model. It's unsustainable economically. We're going through this structural adjustment in our industrial societies at the moment. It's socially unsustainable. Income and wealth differences, health differences are growing. It's also unsustainable in terms of environment, as we know. But it's also unsustainable in terms of our lifestyles and the nature of our well-being. And I will spend a fair amount of time explaining why I think well-being is also unsustainable in our societies. This change is difficult. We have cognitive, economic, social, and systemic rigidities which prevent our societies from adjusting to this new or this changing socioeconomic environment. We have difficulties in adjusting our worldviews and mental frames when the environment is changing so rapidly as it is. We tend to cling to our old mental models and worldviews. There are vested economic interests that try to prevent change because their wealth and political power is in the old structures, and they would not like to see them change. We also have social relationships and ties that bind. Even if we would like to change our life or our organization, we have relationships to other people and other organizations that might not like the change, and we don't want to rock the boat. And we also have systemic rigidities when the systems are complex and it's difficult to change many parts of the system at the same time in a coherent way. So change is not easy, and structural change is particularly difficult. Many people have suggested new, more sustainable approaches to developing our society. But very often these approaches are partial. They might solve, for example, some economic problems. They might increase competitiveness, but at the cost to the environment. Or they could solve some environmental problems, but they would not be consistent with economic prosperity, and so on and so forth. The really big challenge we are facing at the moment is to come up with visions that would be coherent and would solve sustainability problems along many dimensions at the same time. And in Sitra, in my organization, we are trying to develop visions for advanced industrial society that would be based on principles that combine sustainability in many dimensions at the same time. And I will be going through some of those with you today. So we need a shared holistic vision rather than partial worldviews. And we have written a document in my organization that we are currently updating called Towards Sustainable Wellbeing Society. I have a few copies here if you want, you can get after my presentation. And it's also in the net if you're interested. So we have started to work on a sustainable, holistic vision for an advanced society that we try to improve and update once we go on. And maybe you can join our effort at some point. We're trying to be open in this process. And I'm basing my speech today on this publication, but also on this new book that we published in April on the new challenges to well-being in advanced societies. I will speak about these challenges soon. So my agenda today is to take a quick look at the key sustainability challenges and the principles that we think are or would be promoting more sustainable society for the future. I will focus on the changing nature of everyday life and well-being, and particularly the impact of this current transformation on our well-being in today's societies. Then I go through a few of these principles that we lay out in this document that we think are sustainable in multiple dimensions. Empowerment of individuals and communities, the impact of natural and built environments on well-being, new skill requirements for the future society, the demand for or the need for cultural change for sustainability, and the importance of building more resilient systems and societies. And finally, I end up with a call for a broader discourse on sustainability and policy in our societies. So let me begin. The sustainability challenges we go through in our thinking are the following. And many of these are familiar to you. First of all, we have new types of well-being problems in our societies. There are particular pressures on social and psychological well-being. Very often we still talk about well-being in materialistic terms, and of course the basic needs are still important. But there are new challenges to our well-being, particularly in terms of social and mental well-being, that need to be also addressed. We're living in a materialistic consumer culture, and research shows that materialistic people are not very happy. So it's not very good for our subjective well-being, but it also, of course, ruins our environment. The climate change and the environmental problems are familiar to you, so I will not spend time on them, but they're important. We also have aging societies. Finland is among the most rapidly aging societies in the world. I think Japan only is doing it more quickly. And often this aging of society is considered to be a problem for the societies, but we also think that it's an opportunity. We have wealthier, better educated, more active senior citizens in our societies than ever before. And it's a great resource, and we should rethink how we build the society and how we engage with these elderly people. We have mature, sluggish economies where productivity growth has declined and public debt is increasing. This problem dominates the public agenda today. But we also have a structural adjustment crisis, as I mentioned before. And I think this is probably the most important economic challenge that we are facing at the moment. If we are not able to build more competitive, broad-based economic structures in our societies and communities, we will not be economically sustainable, no matter what we do at the macroeconomic policy level. This is my other specialty. I'm working on this problem in Finland at the moment. But it's a problem which all industrial societies are facing at the moment. Then we need new skills in this rapidly changing environment. We have new governance challenges. The role of government and the duties of government are changing, like they changed in the second and first industrial revolutions. We're going to see a new type of government in the future. The old hierarchical way of organizing activities, both in the private and public sector, is in great troubles at the moment. And we will need to rethink how we organize activities. And finally, the shareholder value emphasis of the recent years in the business sector has created major problems, as we know, through the financial crisis and economic crisis that we have just experienced. We need a new perspective to, or new theory of the firm, basically, that is more stakeholder-oriented. And finally, we also have an institutional and democratic crisis. We need new types of regulation for the future. We need policy reforms. And we somehow also need to rejuvenate our democracies. So we have lots of challenges, and I will focus on a few of them, not all of them, in the rest of my speech. So these are the principles for a sustainable society that we have come up so far. All of these principles promote sustainability and sustainable development and sustainable well-being on multiple dimensions. I will focus on only these 6 of them: renewing our understanding of well-being, empowering individuals and communities, developing coherent, sociable and low-carbon living environments, investing in human capital, learning a more sustainable culture, and strengthening resilience. There's too much to cover otherwise. So let me start with this well-being principle. In times of transformation like today, there's a lot of talk about need to change. But we also need a direction for this change. And at least in Finland and in Europe, it seems that we have much less discussion about where societies should go, how they should change. There's a lot of discussion about need for change, but not about the direction of change. And if one starts to think about the direction of change, what kind of vision for the society we would like to have, you quickly come to the ultimate aim of all of our activities, which is good life and well-being. And so we need a good understanding of well-being to build better societies. But once you start to scratch the surface of our understanding of well-being, you recognize that we have partial perspectives to it. We don't really have a consensus, holistic understanding of well-being. We know bits and pieces about different factors of well-being, but we have a fuzzy understanding of the whole picture. So we need to have a more holistic and deeper understanding of well-being to improve our societies. And if we had such an understanding, it would have multiple benefits. First of all, it would support our everyday decision-making. We would make better decisions in our individual lives. It would also facilitate the development of better incentives for sustainable lifestyles. Very often we think that if we change our lifestyles towards more sustainable behavior, we have to sacrifice something. It's not nice. But there are examples where a deep understanding of the different determinants of well-being allow us to develop incentives whereby if we change our behavior and become more sustainable in our behavior, we are compensated with, let's say, social esteem, appreciation of our neighbors, and many other factors which improve our well-being. So we don't have to sacrifice by becoming more sustainable in our behavior. This is a new idea and a new field of research, so it needs to be explored more, but it's very promising. Deeper understanding of well-being also allows firms and governments to develop better living environments, because then we would know what really matters in our living environments for well-being. Economically also, we could benefit from such understanding, because in a high-cost society like Finland or Canada, firms can compete internationally based on high value added, not with cost, because there are always societies with lower costs. We need to add more value than competitors. And in consumer markets, value ultimately stems from contributions to well-being. So if we understand the determinants of well-being in everyday life, we are able to develop better products and services with more value added, and hence which are more competitive. So well-being and competitiveness are not contradictory. In my country, in Finland, the traditional thinking was that well-being means welfare state, which means high taxes and lots of regulation, which is bad for companies. But I would argue that understanding well-being in death allows firms and governments to develop better products and services which have more value added, which are more competitive, which is good for the economy. And of course, if we build such an understanding of well-being and firms take advantage of that, that will also attract increased investment and expertise. So I'm making the argument that innovation based on in-depth understanding of well-being would attract firms and experts from outside to those communities that engage in such innovation. And finally, in times of austerity, governments need to make cuts. And it's much easier to make those necessary cuts in budgets if you know what really matters to people and what's less important. And if we understand well-being, we can focus government efforts on those activities that really matter. Now, the public discourse in our societies very often evolves around these two poles. The economy on the one hand, competitiveness, productivity, efficiency, or the public sector, its services, its public budget deficits, and so forth. And we rarely discuss the ultimate aim of these two systems, which is well-being and good life. We, in a way, tend to assume that we understand well-being, we don't have to discuss that. Let's focus on the economy, or let's focus on the welfare state in Finland, or the public sector perhaps here. But based on our well-being studies, it seems that we don't really understand well-being well enough, and we should stop at the moment and think carefully about what the ultimate aim is, what drives well-being, and how we could best promote it. Now, when countries develop, they tend to have different values than once they are more developed. And this is a chart from a World Value Survey. And its authors, Ronald Ingerhardt and Chris Welchel, they have said that countries tend to start with traditional and survival values. They're on the left lower hand corner of this graph. And once they become wealthier and they industrialize, they adopt more secular and rational values. And then finally, once they reach the advanced state, they tend to engage or embrace self-expression values. And they say that the priorities in industrialized societies have shifted in recent years towards subjective well-being, self-expression, and quality of life. So that's what's important to people in today's societies, advanced societies, like Canada and Finland. So we need to refocus also because of our values on well-being. Now, what has changed in today's society? We have moved from deprivation problems, which are still there, but only applying to a minority of people nowadays. I mean, if I take the Finnish perspective, Finland was a poor country in the early 1960s. And the social scientists and policymakers then wanted to focus on economic growth to solve the most urgent well-being problems of society in the early 60s, which were basically scarcity problems, material scarcity problems. But both Finland and Canada have changed quite a bit from the early 1960s. Of course, Canada was wealthier at that point, but still we have increased resources and capabilities available in our everyday life. The basic material needs have been satisfied for the majority of the people. We have increased freedoms. There's been deregulation, and the strong norms of our societies have become less so in this post-materialistic world. However, there is more uncertainty and complexity in today's world due to this transformation of our societies and increasing specialization of our societies. Personal or people and productive resources are more mobile today than ever before, and there is increased market pressure surrounding our everyday life. And we are more harried than before. Now, these changes cause challenges to our everyday life. And perhaps the most important challenge is to our decision-making capacity. Because we have this uncertainty, information overload. Our decisions have impact to the other side of the world even. And we don't know about all of those impacts of our daily decisions. And we are living in more and more normless society, so we can pick and choose what norms we want to follow. There is increasing individualism and selfishness in our societies, and conformity to market pressures. And we have become increasingly short-term oriented or myopic in our decision-making, and procrastination is widespread. One study said that more than 90% of people procrastinate, that basically only a small minority does not. And that's probably an evolutionary trait that we have. It's been useful for humankind to put off decisions and act as long as possible. And finally, there seems to be increasing lack of loyalty in social relationships because we have increasing choice. We can change relationships more easily than before. And the world looks like this. This is a graph from Maureen O'Hara, psychology professor who took part of our in our research project. We're trying to navigate in a rapidly changing world with the map or mental frame that does not help us so much anymore. We're confused and stressed. This is another picture from her slides. Of course, she's a psychology professor, so she also thinks about these more severe consequences. Some people really end up having mental health problems in this very demanding world that we're living. Now, firms have realized this change perhaps better than us individuals. 2 or 3 years ago, there was a global survey of major international corporations' CEOs by IBM. And they asked these firms' CEOs that, what are your worst challenges in today's world economy? And they answered that complexity, not understanding what's going on, is the major problem. And a year later, Harvard Business Review ran a cover story on the same challenge. So firms have faced this in a serious way, and I would argue that we are facing that in our individual lives also. Now, this is how our lives tend to look like. I must admit that even if I've spent 6-7 years studying well-being and the different determinants, and it's become very clear that managing our everyday life is a big challenge in today's society. I'm in a situation like this. I'm trying to manage my working life, my leisure time with all these activities available, all of which are good per se. But once you combine all these activities in one day, and you have just fixed amount of time and fixed mental capacity, you run into trouble. And that's what we tend to do nowadays. We engage in lots of nice activities, both at work and leisure time, but we tend to forget that we only have fixed amount of time and fixed mental energy. And it's very difficult to manage this situation. Another problem with our everyday decision making is that many of our daily choices involve both positive consequences to our well-being and small negative consequences to our well-being. And we tend to neglect those small negative impacts, but they tend to accumulate either over time, once we repeat those choices, or in large groups of people, if many people choose similarly. And here are some examples of these problems that are created by these kinds of small unintended consequences. And as you can see, these are major well-being problems in our societies. And again, we should focus on these decision-making situations, try to help people to make more prudent choices and become aware of these slowly accumulating problems in our decision-making. So, the world has changed. What are the determinants of well-being in today's society, and what should we do? Here is a holistic framework that I've been building the past few years in trying to make sense of what are the key factors affecting our well-being. There are not very many of these kinds of holistic frameworks available. The only similar framework I've come across is by the New Economics Foundation in London. They have also tried to build a more holistic framework. Most of the well-being research is more narrowly focused on certain aspects of well-being. But I think it's really important to try to see the whole picture. So if you start from the right-hand side of this graph, we could make the argument that subjective well-being stems from needs satisfaction. And there you see the traditional Maslowian needs, but I've added sense of coherence as another important factor there. And sense of coherence consists of the comprehensibility of your life, the manageability of your life, and the meaningfulness of your life. And these needs have become increasingly important and also under pressure in today's societies. I'll say more about that soon. But we try to satisfy these needs in our everyday activities, in our different roles as a worker, consumer, family member, and so forth, based on resources and capabilities that are available to us: income, wealth, knowledge, physical and mental health, social relationships, information, and so forth. And all this takes place in a larger environment shaped by the nature, infrastructure, technological development, organizational arrangements, cultural norms, and so forth. And the important thing is that nearly all of these determinants have changed over time during the past 2 or 3 decades. They might have changed a bit more in Finland than in Canada, but I would assume that if you take a close look at the importance of different needs, the way everyday life has changed, the resources available to people and so forth, in Canada you would also come to the conclusion that there's been a major change here. And we haven't reframed well-being even if we've had such a change. Now, if we focus on this sense of coherence more carefully, it's a framework that was laid out by Aaron Antonovsky to explain health. He was interested in the determinants of health. But later research has shown that his framework also explains subjective well-being and the quality of life very well. It's interesting to take his framework and ask what the current transformation of our societies has done to these important needs in our lives. And unfortunately, it seems that the current transformation and the trends that I just described are putting increasing pressure on these 3 needs in our mental well-being. And hence, it's no surprise to me that mental well-being has become an issue and mental well-being problems are accumulating in our societies. We are under more stress than before in these dimensions. And the mental health problems in our societies are serious. Globally, about 25% of people suffer from mental disorders, both in developed and developing countries. And mental illness is the leading cause of disability in North America, in Europe, in Finland, in UK. It's a really big social problem. 26% of Americans experience a mental disorder each year, and 46% of them experience mental illness during their lifetime. In Europe, a similar figure is 27%. And these problems apply to all social groups, young, the old, women, men, and so forth. And depression is projected to be the leading cause of years lived with disability worldwide in the near future. So we're dealing with a very serious problem. Here is a graph from the Global Burden of Disease Study 2010. And as you can see, mental and substance use disorders are the leading cause of years lived with disability. And if you break down this mental and substance use disorder, you can see that depressive disorders and anxiety are the two biggest shares there. And of course, these are very costly problems to the society. I mean, not to speak about the lost well-being individually. I will not go through these figures, but you will see that they are huge. We're talking about trillions of dollars. And it's a major chunk in our healthcare costs overall. So we're dealing with a major issue, and this, I'm not aware how much these mental well-being issues are being discussed here in Canada. But I know that in Europe, it's mainly in the UK that they have risen to the public policy agenda. And in other countries like Finland, we're still talking about the old problems, which are still important. But we now have this new mental well-being problems, which are equally important and should be integrated into the discourse. So let me move on to the other principles. The other number 2 principle is empowering individuals and communities. Many people in today's society feel powerless and disempowered due to the structural change, unemployment, life management problems, and so forth. They would need new skills, new kinds of support and empowerment to live better lives in today's society. More customized public services and also private services would help. One-size-fits-all types of services, or universal services like we call them in Scandinavia, they do not help very much anymore. Or they are not as good as they could be. I think I got stuck here. No, there we go. People also seek for opportunities for meaningful participation, cooperation, and co-production. They would like to participate in the service production. And participatory and community-based governance arrangements like peer-to-peer networks, cooperatives, public-private partnerships, and so forth would have multiple benefits. They would focus on the assets rather than problems. They would develop people's skills and social cohesion, activate citizens, encourage experimentation, and promote well-being of the participants. They are also often cost-efficient solutions, and they strengthen democracy. So there are lots of pros in these kinds of governance arrangements. So what should we do? We could provide places, platforms, and resources for dialogue and cooperation. We could open public sector processes and activities to participation. we could also offer our unutilized resources such as data, expertise, and buildings for active individuals and communities. And as I mentioned, we could promote more customized human-centric services. And then public organizations could try to be flexible in terms of working times and work arrangements so that work and other life would be easier to combine. It would be good also to have clear, understandable organizational structures and visions and strategies so that people would know what they are expected. So let me move to this other principle, that is developing coherent, sociable, and low-carbon living environments. This is important because we are suffering from this increased stress in today's complex and uncertain living environment. So, in principle, it would be good if we had more coherent living environments. Nature and being close to nature is very important. Lots of research shows that if people have access to nature daily, they are healthier, they live longer, and their quality of life is higher. So that should be taken into account once we build communities. However, built environment also affects people's well-being. It's important to provide places for social interaction because social relationships are highly important for well-being, like pedestrian streets, plazas, and so forth, cafes, and so on. And then we should also try to minimize unnecessary mental dissonance, such as noise, distracting lights, poor street signage, and architectural style contradictions. These all burden our minds. Technologies should be as easy to use as possible. And we have an increasing need for customized personal services. Zsuzsanna Chubov, Harvard professor, has talked about support economy, where she argued 10 years ago that the current service approaches are too mass production oriented, that we would really need in our everyday life customized, personalized services to cope with the increasingly complex world. And if we want to improve the environmental impact of our living environment, we should build traffic infrastructures and houses and commuting choices which would make it easier for us to reduce our carbon footprint. Then this transformation is also putting pressure on our skills and the education system. We need new types of skills to manage our lives. In particular, we need a broad knowledge base. We would need cross-disciplinary cognitive abilities in order to cooperate with other people with different backgrounds. We need more generalists than before. The education system has tended to provide specialized skills. But we need also what I call T-type skills. We need some special skills, but we also need to have horizontal skills to be able to work with other people. So this puts a lot of pressure on our education systems. We also have new technologies that should be better utilized in the education system. I'm not sure how far you are in Canada in terms of adjusting the education system, but I must admit that in Finland we're just right in the beginning, despite our good PISA results. And in fact, it could be a bad thing for us that we have had such good PISA results, because it has made us complacent. So we've thought that we have a great system, we don't have to change it. But we do have to change it. There should be an increasing emphasis on lifelong learning. We cannot manage with the education that we get early in our lives. Then moving on to a sustainable culture. I'm running out of time, so I'm speeding up. I have a few slides left, so I'm getting there. So we are living in a new world. Maureen O'Hara, this psychology professor, has said that we are like strangers in a new land. We don't know how to really behave in a prudent way in this new world. We're learning by trial and error, and that's why we need this kind of research that we could speed up this learning process and learn to live more sustainably in the changed environment. And we need collective learning processes through which our culture adjusts and changes towards a more sustainable path. Without collective learning processes and new mental frames, we will not make those decisions that will change society's structures and processes and organizations and strategies. If nothing happens between our ears, the society will not change. So we need to learn new ways of doing things. And we need to become more conscious about the impacts of our daily decisions on the society and on the environment. And as argued, short-sightedness and selfishness are the key problems here. There are some new approaches to policy making, particularly around the world, nudge, which are quite promising. Nudge meaning that we try to shape the decision environments of people so that it's easier for them to make good choices. But there is another complementary approach that is called think strategy, which is that we make people better aware of the biases that each one of us has in our decision making, because we tend to make regular mistakes in our decision making. Psychological studies have shown that we have, I think, about 20 common mistakes that we make, which are costly to our well-being. So if we became more aware of those problems, we could try to avoid them better. Quickly, some words about resilience. This ever more complex world has created new kinds of fragilities in our societies. People talk about black swans or X events, sudden, unexpected crises that happen and strike the society. And the pursuit of efficiency in all of our activities has increased the likelihood of such events. And so in today's world, these surprise shocks shatter our society quite often, and it's become important to build in to our societies more resilience against such shocks. And there are two ways of doing this. And I must say here that Ervin Laszlo, who's a great futurist, has said that we are now in a bifurcation point. We are in a crossroads where either we are able to develop better governance mechanisms for our society that are better able to deal with the increasing complexity of our societies, or we will face failure or major crises. And that human evolution has always gone through these kinds of crossroads where we have been able to develop better governance arrangements and we have moved on. But there's always this other alternative that if we cannot do that, we will have a major crisis, even collapse. So we're living interesting times. So what can we do? We can either try to somehow simplify our living environment so that we do not have to face such a high level of complexity. Or then we can at the same time try to develop better governance arrangements that are more sophisticated and can better deal with this increased complexity. Some examples would be increasing experimental activities, building more decentralized and modularized structures, creating more behavioral options to our strategies, opening data and innovation to external parties, building collaborative networks, using participatory methods of decision-making, building redundancy to our systems, and so on and so forth. So there are many ways in trying to build a resilience to our organizations. There's also a governance approach or process-based approach to building resilience. And that emphasizes the fact that little shocks help us to build more resilient systems. So we have this example of curling parents that try to make their kids' life easy by wiping out all the obstacles on the way. And Nassim Taleb, who's studied these resilient systems, says that that's absolutely wrong strategy, because all systems become more resilient if they have to face little obstacles and they have to learn of how to deal with them, and they build capabilities by doing so. So it's not bad that we have some challenges and obstacles, as long as we can deal with them, because that builds our capacity, our resilience. And it also motivates adaptation, diversifies our knowledge and capabilities, and releases resources for redeployment. The other thing is to try to understand these complex systems that we face better. Try to understand the different interdependencies in our societies, the feedback loops between decisions, the different fragilities in our systems, and so forth. So we have to pay more attention to the complex interdependencies of our communities and societies. We can also develop better abilities to do foresight and assess things and to get rapid feedback so that we can adjust when need be. We need trust, dialogue, and cooperation, and we need tolerance for dissent in our organizations. So there are many ways of improving resilience of our systems. And at the individual level, this sense of coherence is the source of resilience. The people who have strong sense of coherence can face difficulties better than people who have poor sense of coherence. So, finally, I would argue that we should try to open and extend our public discourse from the traditional sustainability framework, emphasizing these three sustainability dimensions: economic, social, and ecological, and also from our traditional way of seeing policy world as being economic or public administration, welfare state. We should open these discussions and move them towards embracing natural environment and the natural constraints to our policies, but also towards civil society and well-being. And this kind of discourse could then lead us to a more sustainable society in the long term. Thank you very much.